Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. What is the best manufactured vise for a workbench? If that's a question you would like answered, stay with me. Based on my experience, I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help you take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, be sure to subscribe. Turn on that notification bell, and don't forget to turn on the notification on your mobile device so you'll know every time we release a new video. Good? All right, back to the bench. Lots of folks contact me wanting to know my opinion on a workbench, on a vise. Well, you need to understand that if you don't have a workbench with a good vise, you're going to have a very difficult time doing any kind of woodwork. So besides a nice stable vise, the second most important, and perhaps you can't even list them as 1 and 2, they're the same. You have to have a solid vise that will hold your workpiece and not allow it to move. Whether you're sawing it, chiseling it, planing it, it has to be rock solid in order for you to do any good work. I have found what I think is the absolute best vise. Now you need to understand, I have taught woodworking in more locations that I can remember in 3 different countries. I found one that not only fits the bill, but it's everything that you could possibly imagine. It's easy to install, it's rock solid, it eliminates all the problems you find with all those other vices. Now, I don't want this to sound like an infomercial, but since I'm here to help you decide on what you need for your bench, stick to the end, and I'm going to give you a code that will allow you to get one of these as a 15% discount. I think to make this really valuable, we need to have a discussion about different vices so that you know what's out there, what's available, and what you might want to start with versus what you might want to end up with. My absolute favorite vise for doing things like cutting dovetails or mortise and tenon is what's referred to as the Scandinavian shoulder vise. Now, what's unique about this is you literally have to build your bench from the ground up around attaching this type of a vise. This was made popular by folks like Tay Frid and Frank Kloss, and both of those gentlemen, I think, represent the epitome in hand tool woodworking. What's so good about it? Well, you'll notice that there are no obstructions underneath. So at no point are you having to pinch one side of your workpiece, which typically is what happens when you have what I would call the average off-the-shelf vise. Because there's no obstructions, you put your board centered on the middle rod, and it just holds it rock solid. And you can hold something that wide, you can actually hold it even wider. But it just holds it, presses it against the side of your bench, so if there's any cup, it straightens all that out. It's the absolute best vise for this type of work. But as I mentioned, it's not easy to build, the hardware is expensive, and it's got to be done right. Might be a little bit more than what the beginning woodworker is going to want to bite off for his first vise. So on the other end of my bench, I have what I would consider my second favorite vise. This is referred to as a wagon vise. Its primary function is to hold a board flat on your bench when you plane. So there's 2 dogs in mine. You bring the dog up, squeeze it against the other one, knock it down so it's tight, and it's a perfect apparatus for holding that piece while you're planing. Not really good for a whole lot of other things, but it's all right. This is what I wanted it for. Now, it's a little bit complicated to build. This moving piece is made up of several sections. There's a couple pieces I use cocobolo in here that ride in these grooves to keep it from popping up and down. I've got special hardware that involves what's called a double start thread, so it moves really quickly. This isn't cheap. And the bench itself has to be purpose-built from the ground up again in order to incorporate this kind of a vise. So if you're just getting started at this may be a little more than what you want to tackle as your first project. So this is another version of a tail vise. This was the very first one that I built. This is extremely complicated. It's the reason why I went to the wagon wheel vise. This is essentially a big rectangle, but there's all kinds of pieces underneath. The downside is it's really not designed to have any pressure applied here. Its main purpose is to lock your board in when you're planing, to hold it flat to your bench top, and it does that very well. It does also provide you with a set of jaws here. But because there's so many different pieces in there, and there has to be a level of precision that will prevent this from wiggling around on you, so you have to be very close with it. I wouldn't do it again. It took a tremendous amount of time, and I think you can get everything you need from the wagon wheel vise without having to go through all the extra effort for this. So again, this is another one of those vices that is great once it's done, but probably more than you're going to want if you're just getting started. Now, a leg vise that you see on the screen, this is another vise that has recently grown in popularity. It's a single screw vise that mounts on the leg of the bench, but to be effective, it needs to be held at the bottom with some type of a mounting system, either a cross-link system or a board with holes in it that will allow you that you insert a pin through. This also takes a fair bit of skill to mount, and you still have hardware in the middle of the vise. So if you're dovetailing a wide, long board like the side of a case, you can't clamp it right in the middle of the piece because of that. This is what we would refer to as a face vise. Now, in this application, I actually use it as a tail vise. But the nice thing about it, it's easy to install. As long as you have an overhang, you can attach it to the bottom side. It can, however, be installed over here and turned into what we might call a shoulder vise. A little more complicated because you have to cut through your stretcher in order to allow for it. But in this application, piece of cake. There's a couple of downsides. One is the fact that you have rods underneath here, so you're going to be somewhat limited in how much you can clamp without obstruction. Now, you can alter that by putting a larger vise jaw on here, and you can do that as wide as you want. The other downside to this is that these tend to rack, meaning they move side to side, so as you pinch your board and it's off to one side, it's going to pull tight on this side and leave this side loose, so that's not the greatest. But, as I said, quick, easy to install, good option for somebody that's just getting started. Now the last vise I want to talk about is pictured on the screen is what's called a Moxon Vise. Really a single purpose, meaning it's designed to hold a workpiece that you're going to dovetail on. Doesn't have a whole lot of other crossover functions, but very good at doing that, very simple to make. You can put it up on top of the bench to elevate your work. It's probably an option that you would want to use in addition to other vices. So it doesn't really fit into this category of bench vices, but something you need to know about because there are times when you may want to use something like this. Okay, I have worked on lots of benches and I've used lots of vices. I needed a vise for our bench, so I had to find the best out there, and I did. That's the good news. And it's the Schoberg, and I'm going to show you why. It's extremely robust, very well made, very easy to adjust, even easier to install. By the way, it comes with a handle. Now the wooden jaw you add yourself because it's very specific to your bench. But here are the advantages. First thing you're going to notice is it's heavy and very well made. Extremely easy to install. There's 4 legs on either side. There's 2 little 1/8-inch notches you cut on the underside, and that's where these tabs fit in. Other than that, you drill a little bit of a hole right here to allow for this, and that's all you have to do for the installation. Now, the big advantage, you'll notice that on most vices, they use round tubes. What these guys use are rectangular bars. So this rectangular frame is extremely rigid. You'll notice over here that there's a phenolic strip between the side of this bar and the frame, and there's one over here, but there's also a steel rod right in here, steel bar. On the outside, there are 2 bolts with locking nuts. That allows you to tighten up both to remove all the racking, meaning it does not shift side to side as you're tightening up. You can take all of that out. You can actually make them quite tight and still move it because of how slippery that piece of phenolic is. It's absolutely the best vise of this type that you're going to find. It may cost a little bit more, but trust me, you want to put a smile on your face every time you use it, not a frown. First thing to do in installing this, I want to mount the vise jaw. The reason is it helps with the spacing when we put this on the underside of the bench. So that's going to fit in there like that. You can use solid wood if you have access to it. You can glue narrower pieces together. You can actually glue several pieces of plywood together. And what you want to do is cut a notch to go around these 2 bars and the rod in the middle. If you cut them wide enough, you can avoid these welds. In other words, you've got to go in there and recess this material to compensate for that. Now, you also have a radius in here, so what I'm going to do is just come in, using a router, I'm going to cut a radius, and I'm just going to follow all along here, and it just makes it a little bit easier, so I guaranteed I want to make sure that this surface and that surface register firmly against this surface and this surface. Hey, if you like this video, we have more. Our monthly newsletter has subscriber-only content, discounts monthly on tools, and anything we bring out that's new, subscribers get first crack at it. Click on the link below. Let's get back to work. Okay, let's make sure this fits properly. Okay, so that sits nice and solid. Now what I'm going to do is put a couple clamps on there, pull it tight against the back and tight against the bottom. And there's 4 screws on the top and 4 on the bottom. So we're just going to drill some pilot holes. Okay, I don't want this down tight because you don't want to risk having these flanges sticking out beyond the end of your bench. What will happen is you clamp something in there and you're going to have little dents as a result. So you always want to have that go back a little bit. So I'm going to open that up just a bit. At the same time, I don't want to open it too much because then I lose the capacity. So I need to know where to drill a hole to allow for this and also for those tabs in the back. So we'll put this in place. Line it up. My jaw is 20 inches, so it's the exact width of the bench top. And then I'm back enough. I'm just going to give it a good whack. So there's my recess hole. There's my tab here and my tab here. We'll do the easy one first. Doesn't need to be very deep. It's plenty. Now we're going to route these, and we want to make them. They need to be, both need to be the same distance from the front. So we'll actually just use the spacing on one. And what I'm going to do is clamp a board on here so that I can simply go in with my router and use that as a fence. Okay, those tabs are 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to set my router for 7/16 just to make sure I don't end up keeping them too short. Now I want to measure from the this side to the edge. That is 1.75 inches. So I'll come in here on this. You can see it, but there's the mark. So I'll go 1.75 inches. Now come over here. I'm going to go ahead and make it, just so it's easier to read, I'm going to make it 11 inches. And I'll put a mark over here at 11 inches. Now that I've got 2 marks, I can't tell. This one right here. So I'll put my guide on here, line it up with those 2 marks, and clamp it in place. It's not going to hold the bottom of the bench, so I'll put it underneath of this. Okay, so there's my stop and start, there's my stop and start. Now, a plunge router would be better, so you got to be careful with this because the cutter's going to be down, so I'm going to be careful to make sure I keep it tight. It would be ideal to have an even taller fence so that you could ride against the fence all the way down. Okay, set this in place. Snug that up so it pulls up and rights itself. Now, what you'll notice is that there's going to be a mark from the vise screw right here. And to just make that a little bit easier, I'm going to come in here with a carving chisel. This is MDF top, so it's not hard to cut. And I'm just going to cut a slot right through there. That'll just make that screw turn a little easier. You'll notice that I had to go in, my hole was a little off center. I had to go in and with a chisel and just cut some more out in order to allow that to go over to my left. Now before we put it in, we have to take this nut out in order to get at that mounting hole. You can get at the hole, just can't use the ratchet. Now I'm gonna use lag screws, and these are 2 inches long, so that's gonna put us down into the second layer. Now I like to go in and tighten those by hand, that last little bit, just to make sure they're tight enough without stripping them with that ratchet. Okay. Now we'll put the handle on so we can make adjustments a little bit easier. Now, if you want your handles to last a little longer, what you want to do is put a O-ring on either end, and then it won't slam when you adjust the handle. Now this is snug. That's all right. The screw will loosen up a little bit. What we want to do now is eliminate any racking. So here's the way we do it. You need 2 half-inch wrenches. You've got to put this one back in. And remember, what we're doing is tightening that steel blank against that phenolic strip. Don't want it too tight, but you want it tight enough that, as I mentioned, it won't rack. So there's no movement at all. All right, let's show you this on one we've already mounted, and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so we've mounted, we've been using this one. It's relatively free. Put your piece of wood in. You don't have to over clamp, you just need enough pressure to hold it securely. Tight on both ends. This is without a doubt the best vise of this style that you're going to find. If there was one better, I'd be using it because we teach hand tool woodworking. You have to have a good vise. It's got to hold it rock solid. This will work. Check for the code so you can get a 15% discount if you want to build one of these benches. And trust me, it'll be the best thing you've done for your hand tool woodworking, particularly if you're just getting started. Good luck. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.